There are some mysteries so chilling, so unexplainable, that they haunt us for decades. Stories of unspeakable horror, where the truth remains just out of reach. What you're about to hear is some of the scariest true crime cases ever recorded. Stories that will make you question reality, fear the unknown, and wonder what really happened. These are the terrifying true crime stories that will keep you up at night. 10. David Parker Ray, the Toy Box Killer. Imagine waking up in a pitch-black room, wrists and ankles bound, the sound of chains rattling in the darkness. A voice crackles from a tape recorder, calmly explaining that you are now a prisoner, and what's about to happen to you will be worse than your worst nightmares. This isn't a horror movie. This was real life for the victims of David Parker Ray, the Toy Box Killer. David Parker Ray was no ordinary serial killer. He didn't just kill, he tortured. For over 2 decades, he abducted, restrained, and brutally tormented his victims inside a soundproof trailer he called his toy box. This was no ordinary trailer. It was a $100,000 torture chamber, equipped with surgical tools, whips, pulleys, and devices too horrific to describe. He meticulously designed his setup, detailing every sadistic method in a disturbing journal. Ray often lured his victims under the guise of offering help. Many were prostitutes or vulnerable women, making them easy targets. Once inside, they were drugged with a combination of barbiturates and hallucinogens, erasing their memories after he was done with them. Some women, if released, had no recollection of what had happened, only flashes of nightmares they couldn't explain. Authorities believe he had hundreds of victims, yet only a few bodies were ever found. And for years, Ray continued his gruesome crimes without suspicion. But in 1999, his reign of terror came to an end. Cynthia Vigil, a 22-year-old woman he had abducted, managed to escape. After being held captive for 3 days, she seized an opportunity when Ray left the keys to her restraints unattended. Fighting through unimaginable pain, she unlocked herself, ran naked and bloody to the desert, and found help. When police raided Ray's trailer, they were horrified by what they found: gruesome tools, videotapes of his victims, and a chilling instruction manual he had written for torture. His recordings detailed unspeakable acts, and investigators discovered a large mirror attached to the ceiling. So his victims were forced to watch themselves suffer. Ray was arrested, along with his accomplices, including his own girlfriend, Cindy Hendy. Though he was sentenced to 224 years in prison, justice was short-lived. Just a year later, he died of a heart attack before ever fully paying for his crimes. But the biggest mystery remains: where are the bodies? Despite overwhelming evidence, only one set of remains was ever found. Did Ray dispose of them so well they'd never be found? Or are there still missing victims out there? Their families never know what happened? One thing is certain: David Parker Ray wasn't just a serial killer. He was a monster who turned his darkest fantasies into real-life horror. And somewhere in the vast New Mexico desert, the secrets of the Toy Box Killer remain buried. 9. The Hinterkaifeck Murders, Germany's most haunting unsolved crime. A lonely farmhouse, a family slaughtered in the dead of night, and a mystery that has remained unsolved for over a century. What happened on the Hinterkaifeck farm is not just terrifying, it's the stuff of nightmares. Because whoever committed this gruesome crime may have been living among the victims for days before killing them. The year was 1922. Hinterkaifeck, a small farmstead in rural Germany, was home to the Gruber family: Andreas, his wife Casilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, her 2 children, and their maid. It was a quiet, isolated farm, far removed from the nearest village. But in the days leading up to the murders, something strange began happening. Footsteps were heard in the attic, but no one was there. A newspaper appeared on the doorstep that no one had purchased. And when Andreas found footprints leading from the woods to the house, but none leading back, he knew something was terribly wrong. Then, on March 31st, the horror began. One by one, the Gruber family was lured into barn and slaughtered with mattock, a type of farming pickaxe. Whoever did it didn't stop there. After finishing in the barn, they went inside and murdered the 2-year-old and the maid in their beds. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. The killer didn't leave. For days after the murders, smoke was seen coming from the farmhouse chimney. Neighbors reported seeing someone feeding the livestock. Even the family dog was let out and cared for. It was as if the killer had moved in, living among the dead. When the crime was finally discovered, investigators were left with nothing but unanswered questions. There was no sign of forced entry. No valuables were stolen, and despite dozens of suspects, no one was ever arrested. One theory: the murderer had been hiding in the house for days before striking. Another: the killings were personal, perhaps tied to a dark family secret. Some even believe Victoria's husband, who was supposedly killed in World War I, had returned for revenge. But with no surviving witnesses and only cryptic clues, the truth was buried along with the victims. Today, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of the most chilling unsolved cases in history. The farm itself was demolished long ago, but the legend lives on. Who killed the Gruber family? And why did they stay on the farm afterward, tending to the animals and keeping the place running as if nothing had happened? Maybe we'll never know. Maybe the answers died with the killer. Or maybe someone out there still knows the truth. 8. The Watcher House. A family's nightmare unfolds. Imagine moving into your dream home, only to realize someone is watching you. Not just watching, but writing chilling letters about your every move. They know your children's names, your schedule, your secrets, and no matter what you do, they won't stop. This is a true story of the Watcher House, one of the creepiest unsolved mysteries in modern history. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus purchased a stunning 6-bedroom house in Westfield, New Jersey. It was supposed to be their perfect family home. But just days after closing the deal, a letter arrived. The sender? Someone who called themselves the Watcher. The letter was disturbing. It began with a simple greeting. "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." But it quickly took a dark turn. "My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s. My father watched in the 1960s. And now it's my time. Do you know the history of this house? Do you know what lies within the walls?" At first, the Broadduses thought it was a joke. But then another letter came. And another. The Watcher knew everything. They described the Broaddus children in unsettling detail, writing, "I see you have already flooded 657 Boulevard with young blood. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time, they will." Derek and Maria were terrified. They stopped bringing their kids to the house, hired private investigators, and even went to police. But no fingerprints were found, no DNA, no clues. The letters kept coming. The Watcher taunted them. "You have changed it and made it so fancy. It cries for the past and what used to be in the time when I roamed its halls." The 1960s were a good time for 657 Boulevard, when I ran from room to room imagining the life within. Desperate for answers, the Broadduses looked into the home's history. They discovered that the previous owners had also received a letter, but never spoke out. The Watcher had been lurking in the shadows for decades. Despite hiring experts, setting up surveillance, and questioning neighbors, the identity of the Watcher remained a mystery. Some believed it was a disturbed local resident. Others suspected a former owner obsessed with the home. And then there was a chilling theory that the Watcher wasn't just watching, but waiting. In the end, the Broaddus family never moved in. They were forced to sell the house at a massive loss. The Watcher was never caught. And to this day, 657 Boulevard remains a home with a secret, one that may never be uncovered. 7. Issei Sagawa, the cannibal who walked free. Most murderers try to cover up their crimes. But what if the killer didn't just admit to it, but celebrated it? What if he described his crime in gruesome detail, turned it into books, interviews, and even artwork? This is a horrifying true story of Issei Sagawa, the man who killed, ate his victim, and never spent a single day in prison. In 1981, Issei Sagawa was a 32-year-old Japanese student studying literature at the Sorbonne in Paris. He was quiet, intelligent, and came from a wealthy family. But beneath his polite exterior, he harbored a dark obsession. He wanted to eat human flesh, and he had already chosen his victim. Her name was Renee Hardevelt, a fellow student. She was beautiful, intelligent, and had no idea she was being lured into a nightmare. On June 11th, Sagwa invited her to his apartment for dinner under the guise of working on a school project. But as she sat reading poetry, he pulled out a rifle, aimed at the back of her head, and pulled the trigger. But Sagwa wasn't done. For the next 2 days, he dismembered Renee's body, methodically cutting flesh from her limbs and consuming it raw. He later described the taste as melting like tuna. He photographed every step, documenting his sick fantasy coming to life. When her remains began to rot, he packed them into suitcases and hailed a taxi to dump them in a nearby lake. But he was clumsy. Blood leaked from the cases, and horrified bystanders alerted the police. Sagwa was caught immediately, standing beside the evidence of his crime. He confessed without hesitation. In court, he openly admitted he had always dreamed of cannibalism. But instead of being sentenced to death, French authorities declared him legally insane and unfit for trial. He was committed to a mental institution. But that's not where the story ends. 2 years later, his wealthy father used his influence to have him extradited to Japan. And in a shocking twist, Japanese authorities found a legal loophole. The French courts had dismissed his case, so Japan had no legal grounds to charge him. Just like that, Issei Sagwa walked free. Not only did he avoid prison, he embraced his infamy. He wrote books describing the murder in graphic detail. He starred in documentaries, painted disturbing artwork, and even became a minor celebrity. When asked if he regretted it, he simply smiled and said, "I still dream of eating human flesh." 6. The Dyatlov Pass Incident, a terrifying mystery in the snow. 9 experienced hikers venture into frozen Ural Mountains and never return. When their bodies are found, the scene is so disturbing that even the most hardened investigators are left speechless. Some are missing their eyes. Others have crushed skulls and broken ribs, without any external wounds. And one victim? Her tongue is gone. What happened on Dyatlov Pass remains one of the most terrifying mysteries in history. It was January 1959. A group of 9 hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, set out on a challenging trek in the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. They were experienced, prepared, and well-equipped for freezing conditions. But something happened that no one could have predicted. On February 1st, the group set up camp on the slopes of Kolotsyakhl, meaning Dead Mountain. They pitched their tent, ate their last meal, and settled in for the night. They would never be seen alive again. Weeks later, a search party discovered the abandoned tent. It was slashed open from the inside, as if the hikers had desperately tried to escape. Their footprints, barefoot in the snow, led away from the campsite. Something had terrified them enough to flee, half-dressed, into the freezing night. Then came the bodies. The first 2 hikers were found nearly a mile away, wearing only underwear. Their hands were raw, their skin burned from frostbite. 3 more were found between them in the tent, as if they had been crawling back but never made it. But it was the last 4 bodies that turned the Dyatlov Pass incident into a true nightmare. They were found in a ravine, buried under several feet of snow, but their injuries made no sense. 1 had a crushed skull, 2 had shattered ribs, injuries similar to a high-speed car crash. Yet there were no external wounds, no bruises, no blood. And the most horrifying part? 1 woman was missing her eyes and her tongue. Investigators were baffled. There were no signs of an avalanche, no animal attacks. Radiation was found on some of their clothes. The official cause of death? An unknown compelling force. Theories exploded. Some believed a military experiment went wrong. Others thought it was a Yeti attack, or even extraterrestrial interference. The Soviet government quickly shut down the case, fueling suspicions of a cover-up. To this day, no one knows what really happened that night on Dead Mountain. But one thing is certain. Something out there in the frozen wilderness of Dyatlov Pass terrified 9 experienced hikers so much that they ran to their deaths. 5. The Boy in the Box, America's most haunting cold case. A small cardboard box, a child's lifeless body, and a mystery that haunted investigators for over 60 years. Who was the boy in the box? Why did no one come forward to claim him? And who could have abandoned him like a piece of trash? This is one of the most heartbreaking and terrifying unsolved crimes in American history. It was February 25, 1957, in a wooded area near Philadelphia. A college student was walking along a quiet road when he spotted something strange, an old cardboard box lying in the brush. Inside was the small, fragile body of a young boy. He was around 4 to 6 years old, painfully thin, his ribs visible beneath his pale skin. His hair had been crudely cut, tufts still clinging to his body. His arms and legs were covered in bruises. He had been beaten, starved, then discarded like garbage. Investigators were horrified. Who was this child? Why had no one reported him missing? The case exploded in the media. Posters with his face were placed on telephone poles. Newspapers called him America's unknown child. But no one recognized him. No family came forward. It was as if he had never existed. Then came the strange theories. One investigator believed the boy came from a foster home nearby. A woman later claimed he was her son, born out of wedlock and violently beaten to death by her abusive mother. But there was no evidence. Another theory suggested human trafficking, a victim of an underground child-selling ring, discarded when he was no longer needed. And then there was a chilling possibility that he had been raised in captivity, never documented, and his death was meant to erase his existence completely. Decades passed, and the case grew colder. His tiny body was buried with a simple headstone, America's unknown child. But the mystery wasn't over. In 2022, 65 years after his discovery, DNA testing finally revealed his name, Joseph Augustus Sorelli. He had been born into a well-known Philadelphia family. But even with this breakthrough, the identity of his killer remains unknown. Was it a tragic case of parental abuse, or something even darker? We may never know. But for over 6 decades, one question haunted investigators, journalists, and anyone who heard his story. How does a child simply disappear? For the smiley face killers, serial murder or urban legend. Young men vanish without a trace, only to be found drowned days or weeks later. Police call it accidental. But near their bodies, painted on walls, bridges, or hidden underpasses, is the same eerie symbol, a simple, grinning smiley face. Is this the work of a serial killer, or something even more terrifying? This is a chilling mystery of the smiley face killers. Since the late 1990s, more than 100 young men, mostly college-age, athletic, and popular, have been found dead in rivers, lakes, and canals across the United States. The case has stretched from New York to Wisconsin, Minnesota to Ohio. The official cause of death? Accidental drowning. But not everyone believes that. In the early 2000s, retired NYPD detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte began noticing eerie similarities in these cases. The victims weren't just randomly drowning. Many were last seen leaving bars or parties alone, only to disappear into the night. And when their bodies were found, they were often in water that had already been searched, sometimes weeks later, with little decomposition. It was as if they had been kept somewhere before being dumped. Then came the most disturbing detail. Near at least a dozen of these drowning sites, investigators found graffiti of a simple smiley face, sometimes drawn in red paint, sometimes black, always mocking, always near the water. Could this be the signature of a serial killer or a group of killers? Gannon and Duarte believed the deaths were not accidents. They suggested an underground network, an organized group of killers targeting young men across the country, a dark conspiracy operating in secret. They called them the Smiley Face Killers. But the police weren't convinced. Authorities dismissed the theory, calling it pure speculation. They argued that college-age men, drunk and alone at night, simply fell into the water. The smiley faces? Just coincidence. Random graffiti. Yet, the deaths continued. In 2017, Dakota James, a 23-year-old student, vanished in Pittsburgh after a night out. Surveillance footage caught his last moments, wandering near a bridge, appearing confused, maybe drugged. His body was found 40 days later in a river that had been searched multiple times. The official cause? Drowning. But his parents didn't believe it. Similar cases keep appearing. The pattern continues, and the questions remain. Are these deaths just tragic accidents? Or is there something far more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Something that stalks its victims and leaves behind a chilling signature? The truth is still unknown. But if the smiley face killers exist, they're still out there. 3. The Villisca Axe Murders, a house frozen in terror. Some crimes leave behind a trail of evidence. Others only leave behind fear. Imagine a peaceful small town where 8 people are brutally murdered in their sleep, and the killer vanishes, never to be found. This is the terrifying and unsolved mystery of the Villisca Axe Murders. On the night of June 9, 1912, in the small town of Villisca, Iowa, the Moore family, Josiah, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children, returned home from church. Along with them were 2 guests, young sisters Lena and Ina Stillinger, who had come for a sleepover. At some point between midnight and dawn, an unseen figure entered their house. One by one, the killer bludgeoned each victim with an axe. First, the parents. Josiah was struck so violently that his face was completely unrecognizable. Then the children, 6 innocent souls, their small bodies left lifeless. The Stillinger sisters, sleeping in the guest room, met the same fate. But the most chilling detail? The killer didn't leave immediately. After the murders, the assailant covered every mirror and window with cloth, as if they couldn't bear to see what they had done. They even returned to the victims, delivering additional blows post-mortem. Then, as eerily as they arrived, the murderer vanished. No witnesses, no clear motive, no answers. The case shocked the nation. Suspects ranged from deranged drifters to local rivals. Even a traveling minister who had confessed, but later retracted his statement. Despite multiple investigations and trials, no one was ever convicted. And then the rumors began. Some say the Villisca Axe Murder House is still haunted by the spirits of those who died that night. Visitors report hearing children's whispers, doors slamming on their own, and even shadowy figures lurking in the dark. To this day, the house remains frozen in time, a silent witness to the horrors of that fateful night. And the killer? They were never caught. They could have lived the rest of their life knowing they got away with murder. Or worse, they could have killed again. 2. The disturbing case of the silent twins, a bond beyond death. Imagine having a twin, someone who mirrors your every thought, your every action. But what if that bond became so strong that it isolated you from the rest of the world? And what if one twin had to die so the other could truly live? This is a haunting true story of June and Jennifer Gibbons, the silent twins. June and Jennifer Gibbons were born in 1963 in Wales, the only black children in their school. From an early age, they were inseparable, but not in the way most twins are. They refused to speak to anyone else. Not their teachers, not their parents, not even their younger siblings. Only to each other. They developed their own secret language, a rapid, indecipherable dialect only they could understand. When forced to interact with others, they became stiff, robotic, silent. Teachers and doctors were baffled. But what seemed like a harmless quirk soon turned into something dark. As teenagers, their obsession with each other grew toxic. They isolated themselves, writing disturbing diaries filled with violent fantasies. Then, they turned those fantasies into reality, committing arson, theft, and acts of vandalism. Their crimes landed them in Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital, where their silence continued. Doctors tried separating them. It didn't work. The twins remained in a world of their own. Then, Jennifer made a chilling confession. "One of us must die," she whispered to a nurse. "We have decided." In 1993, after spending 12 years in Broadmoor, the twins were finally transferred to a lower security facility. But as they arrived, something strange happened. Jennifer slumped forward unconscious. She was rushed to the hospital. Hours later, she was dead. Cause? A sudden, unexplained inflammation of the heart. No drugs, no poison, nothing medical that could explain why she died. It was as if she willed herself to die, so June could live. And then, something even stranger happened. After Jennifer's death, June started talking. She became social. She led a normal life. It was as if Jennifer's death had freed her. To this day, no one truly knows what happened between the twins. Was Jennifer's death a bizarre medical mystery, a supernatural event, or the final step in a psychological bond so intense that one life had to end for the other to begin? One thing is certain. June and Jennifer Gibbons' story is one of the strangest, most chilling cases of twin telepathy and the power of a deadly, unbreakable bond. 1. The Keddie Cabin Murders, a night of unimaginable horror. A remote cabin in the woods, a quiet family getaway. But one night, it became the site of one of the most brutal and perplexing unsolved murders in history. A massacre so savage that even seasoned investigators were left shaken. This is the horrifying case of the Keddie Cabin Murders. On the night of April 11, 1981, in the small town of Keddie, California, Sue Sharp and her 5 children were spending what should have been a peaceful evening in their cabin. Sue, a recently divorced mother, had moved to Keddie for a fresh start. But what happened that night shattered any hope of a new beginning. The next morning, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp returned home after spending the night at a neighbor's cabin. When she stepped inside, she was met with a sight straight out of a nightmare. Inside the small cabin, 3 bodies lay sprawled on the floor. Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old son John, and John's friend Dana Wingate. They had been tied up, beaten, stabbed, and strangled. Blood coated the walls. The brutality suggested not just murder, but rage, deep personal rage. Even more chilling, Sue had been gagged with medical tape, and her body had been partially undressed. But the horror didn't end there. In another room, 3 younger children, Rick 10, Greg 5, and their friend Justin 12, were found alive, completely unharmed. They had slept through the carnage, or at least that's what they claimed. But Tina Sharp, Sue's 12-year-old daughter, was missing. For 3 years, investigators searched for her, hoping she had somehow escaped. Then, in 1984, her skull was discovered miles away, deep in the woods. She had never made it out alive. Who could have done this? Police found no signs of forced entry, meaning Sue either knew her killer, or they had let themselves in. Some believe she was targeted due to a personal feud. Others think the attack was planned and sadistic, meant to send a message. And then there's the biggest mystery of all, the bizarre police cover-up. Evidence was mishandled or disappeared entirely. Suspects, including a local man with a history of violence, were never charged. Some believe this was intentional, that the murderer was being protected. To this day, the Keddie Cabin Murders remain unsolved. No arrests, no justice, just lingering horror. Cabin 28 has since been demolished, but the ghosts of that night still linger in the whispers of those who remember. And the killer? They might still be out there. Some mysteries are solved, but others remain in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. What do you think really happened in these terrifying cases? Let us know in the comments below. If you love diving into the darkest true crime stories, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, so you never miss a case that will send chills down your spine. Stay safe, you never know who's watching.